If, by some miracle, I get to 77 years old, here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to submerge myself in a massive water tank. I'm not going to let people just fire hoses at me, and I have no intention at all of getting an ear infection that will lead to permanent hearing damage. Robert Redford, who we've just lost at the point this has been recorded, did just that for 2013's All Is Lost, and that's the story I'm going to get into next.
Stories. We would be honoured if you would join us.
It's written and directed by J.C. Chandor, and I mean, it stars Robert Redford and a boat and a load of water. Produced by Justin Nappy, Teddy Schwartzman, Neil Dodson and Anna Gerb. A couple of those people will come in. I'm going to name check the cinematographer, Peter G. DeMarco, and the editor, Pete Boudreau, as well. This was, I mean, it was a project that J.C. Chandor had he had some vestige of in his mind. He liked the idea of doing an open water thriller. That was basically the genesis of it. Now, J.C. Chandor is a writer-director, and he's gone on to do A Most Violent Year. More recently, Craven the Hunter didn't go so well. But he hadn't broken into movies properly until his 30s. It took him some time. But when he did break through with 2011's Margin Call, a very low-budget film that was scrambled together, whose theatrical release ended up being curtailed for reasons, he ended up with an Oscar nomination. He ended up with acclaim, and he ended up with people ringing his agent, offering him work. And I interviewed him last year, actually, when Craven the Hunter came round, and he confirmed that he was getting offers for big movies at that point, but he had this idea for an open water thriller. And his star was at this point. If you're going to do it, this is a good time to do it. It took a little while, though, from that germ of an idea before he had the eureka moment, because what he evolved it into was this plan for a film that just had this one character stuck at sea, no other actor on screen, barely any dialogue at all. The crude way to describe it is it's Castaway if you take away the start and the end and you take the volleyball away, perhaps putting a boat in the place of the volleyball. And as Chandor said, it's a very simple story about a guy late in his life who goes out on a 4-5 month sail. Fate intervenes. Boy, does it intervene. The boat has an accident, and essentially we go on an 8-day journey with him as he fights to survive. And that is the nuts and bolts of the film. And they plotted out this whole, even the backstory for the boat. Maybe he bought it a few years ago, saving it for a retirement or for a big trip, and then spent a little bit of money to spruce it up, but not too much, and then just went off sailing and just enjoying the pleasures and the serenity and calmness of sailing until the fit absolutely hit the shan. The script then to this just wasn't very long. I mean, I think it's either 51 or 53 words of dialogue in total in the film All Is Lost. And so, I mean, when he sent the script to his producer, Neil Dodson, I think it was, 31 pages. Now, the usual rule of thumb with a screenplay is it's 1 minute, 1 page for 1 minute of screen time. 31 pages. Not unreasonably, Neil Dodson says to J.C. Chandor, where is the rest of the script? No, that is your lot. So another producer, Neil Dodson had worked with him on Margin Call, as had Anna Gerb, and she read it and was really keen to be in it, to be part of it, really clicked and gelled with it. And also Chandor had grown up around boats. He wasn't a sailor per se, but he knew the basics. He also knew, as his producers knew, this was going to be a low budget movie, and it was going to be a really tricky one to make. The funding in the end came from, and the budget is only about $9 million, $9 million, comes from a matrix of companies: Black Bear Pictures, Treehouse Pictures, Before the Door Pictures, Washington Square Films, Sudden Store Productions. In the end, its distribution was split between Lionsgate, Roadside Attractions, Film Nation, as it went off around the world. But undeniably, the turning point of the All Is Lost story is Robert Redford, and the point where Robert Redford got involved. Margin Call had gone to the Sundance Film Festival, And the Sundance Film Festival, of course, is the creation of the late Robert Redford, that he poured his energies and a lot of his funding into helping independent filmmakers by setting up the Sundance Institute and the associated festival. And as Shandor told Oregon Live, he went to he took Margin Call to Sundance, but before that, I'd had an encounter about a month earlier because Robert Redford takes all the filmmakers at Sundance away from the festival for a welcome brunch. So this was the 2011 festival. And during that talk, Chandor said, there was this weird technical situation with a speaker going in and out behind me. He said, I was in the back of the room, I'd come in a little late, and I had this realization that he's always been a guy who did his own stunts. I knew that about him. And then this technical glitch kicks in. So the idea of him without a voice became kind of fascinating. And as Shandor said, I did point blank offer to him about a month later this particular film. And I mean, Chandor had mentioned Robert Redford as a possibility to play this character without a name in the film. And as Dodson remembered, he said, look, he's going to say one of two things when he gets this 30-page script. He's either going to say, this sounds great, this sounds amazing, or why would I do that? I'm very much of the latter. Why would I do that? I've got nothing to prove. Why would I put myself through that? And that, I mean, that's the thing. There's still, at 77, the spark of an actor wanting a challenge. Redford liked Chandor, and he also liked the boldness of the script. But also, Chandor had assumed, I think most of us would assume, through all his work with Sundance, that Redford would have been awash with offers from independent films. The great irony of the man who set up Sundance is he wasn't offered independent films. All these independent filmmakers went through his institute and they didn't offer him a role. And I mean, I struggle to wrap my head around that. And Redford said he doesn't get bombarded with invitations to star in the movies of the filmmakers that he's beating the drum for. And I mean, he says there's something kind of ironic in that. All of these years after starting Sundance and starting the festival, none of the filmmakers that I supported ever hired me. They never offered me a part, he said, until JC. If Redford was one stroke of fortune then for All Is Lost, the other would be, of all people, David Fincher. Now, David Fincher is not involved in any way with All Is Lost. He's not on the credits. And as we head to, 2010, 2011, he's got Fight Club behind him. He's got Seven behind him. I mean, he's got a ton of movies. He is David Fincher at that point. And so he was in conversation with Disney about doing a big budget take on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And the idea was that David Fincher's film would be blockbuster level movie, would film on water tanks, and they'd identify Baja Studios in Mexico. Now, Baja Studios in Mexico was basically fundamentally refitted by James Cameron and his team to shoot 1997's Titanic. I mean, it was there for a long time. And so, I mean, it hadn't really had a reinvestment as such in the water tanks till that point. Certainly not a big one. Certainly not the kind of reinvestment to meet David Fincher's exacting standards. So with Disney and Fincher in development on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Disney wrote the check and paid to have these water tanks. I think it was 3 massive water tanks at Baja Studios refitted to the demands of a David Fincher blockbuster movie. And so the idea was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea would shoot. If All Is Lost could get a little bit of time in there, absolutely great. But the problem was in the background that Fincher and Disney, I mean, who saw this coming, weren't exactly seeing eye to eye on the direction on this new take of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Disney is spending millions getting the studio's water tanks refitted and modernised. But in the end, Fincher, Disney with like a few million spent. I mean, it's coins down the back of the sofa to Disney, right? But Disney and Fincher parted company, and the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea film hasn't resurrected since. Fincher was talking about it at the start of 2025 on how they had completely different views of what the film was going to be, and the parting of the ways took the project down. Parting of the ways didn't even mean that. I mean, J.C. Chandor, I mean, he and his team just couldn't believe their luck. They were going to be the first beneficiaries of a massive refit of these water tanks that had been paid for by somebody else. Not a cent of it was coming out of their budget outside of the studio hire, and they were going to have access to blockbuster level stuff to make their film. And as Shandor argued, he told me last year, it just suddenly made their film look like it had cost $50 million rather than $8.5 million. It was still an indie film, though, and a lot of the time with indie film, your prep time is really limited. You get no rehearsal time or anything like that. Well, there was a safety issue there, so the prep time was really important, and they did build in 7 weeks at the studios to set everything up properly. It was going to be a tricky shoot, and so as well as Frank G. DeMarco coming in, they brought in a separate underwater director of photography. This is a man called Peter Zuccarini. Peter Zuccarini had worked on the Pirates of the Caribbean film, so he knew his way around shooting on water. In June of 2012, Robert Redford went swimming. Now, shooting took place almost exclusively at the Barger Studios complex, save for a couple of days out in the ocean that they went with a tiny crew to capture footage there. So they had the water. They also they had Robert Redford. They also needed arguably the other main character in the film, the boat. And for this, they decided they needed to use 3, and they had to acquire 3 yachts, nearly 40 feet tall apiece. They needed one to be able to shoot the interiors. They needed another one for just basically the open water stuff, and then another for some of the complicated effects works they needed to do. They also needed to build a rig for certain bits of the film that I won't spoil as well. And it was John Goldsmith was the production designer who was tasked with finding these boats. He was used to work, he'd worked on The Last Samurai for Ed Zwick and Tom Cruise. He had a budget there. Not here. In this case, he said, we scouted these boats at different times. We purchased them in different ports. It wasn't a case of you put in an order for 3 of the same. They had to find 3 relatively similar boats in completely different places in the end. They all had to be imported, which Goldsmith said was a logistical exercise in itself. And he said, I think we were 2 weeks into prep before all 3 were side by side ready for us to work on. Of those water tanks at the studio, there were 3 that were used, one of which is an infinity tank of sorts that bleeds right to the line of the ocean next door as well. And the physical production meant that the boats were going to be put through the mill. They were going to be sunk. They were going to be raised up, sunk again. They were going to have storms thrown at them, big waves. They were going to take a fair amount of hits. Also, against that, though, one of the things J.C. Chandor realised was you've got no dialogue, and you've got this cinema legend with a very storied face, brings his stories along with him just by looking at him. And he wanted to capture moments of him just doing like really trivial stuff. You couldn't usually do that in many films, but if he wants a bite to eat, let's watch him have a bite to eat. Is it a ghost story where we sit and watch Rooney Mara just like eat apart? It's just like, it's slowing it down to the most trivial stuff, the smallest of stuff, amongst this massive survival story. Does this man want to survive? Has he got the drive to survive 8 days out at sea? Not spoiling the ending either. So it would be fair to say that Redford didn't massively enjoy the shoot, because this wasn't the kind of production where you could, after every take, just go back to your trailer in front of a nice heater with a cup of cocoa, maybe a nice sandwich. He was stuck in the water. To reset a shot, you weren't going to pull him out of the water unless you absolutely had to. Day after day after day after day, he was in the water. He was being hit by water hoses. He was being hit by waves. And there was a stunt performer who was used as well, but Redford still wanted to do a lot of his stuff. There's a bit in the film where he climbs to the top of a mast. That's Redford doing it. And he talked about, it was very appealing at me at this point in my life to be able to go back to my roots as an actor, to be interesting enough to have the audience ride along with you and almost be a part of what you're feeling and thinking. However, as he would say in an interview to the New York Times around the film's release, he said, they beat the hell out of me. There were wave, wind and rain machines. There was a crew member who had a giant hose spraying water at his head. That in turn caused damage. It led to an ear infection, and that infection led to, I think it was 60% hearing loss in his left ear as a result of making that film. And JC Chandor would say that the grips on the set were agog. They're just like, are we really going to spray Robert Redford with a big power hose? Yeah, they were. And I mean, it was a tight schedule, a budget of under 10 million, not room for many luxuries at all. And Redford said in the end, I was so tired of being wet, and there was no time not to be wet except at night. And so then it was tequila. Part and parcel of it being an independent film meant that reshoots were going to be not a chance. They got their stroke of luck booking into the studio when they did and feeling the benefit of what was there. There was going to be a queue behind them. They couldn't afford to rebook. And so Pete Boudreau, the editor, would basically be doing editing on location to show JC Chandor what the film was looking like, because there was no going back once this was done. And against fears of shooting on water and all the difficulties that entailed, they were warned about it before. So I'll never shoot on water. Just ask the people who made Jaws 3D. All is lost shoot, nonetheless, wrapped on time and on budget. Now, there was still quite a lot to be done in post-production on the film. As much as it was physical, they were still shooting on tanks. And he told me last year that they still needed around 1,000 effect shots to put in. Now, these weren't massive explosions or aliens. It was things like putting a convincing sky in the background, getting the background right, fluffing the waves a little bit, just adding a tiny bit more peril. But also, he had the footage that they'd taken from the ocean and the footage in the tanks. And as Chandor would tell Oregon Live, it's essentially a jigsaw puzzle, this edit. You're seeing a lot more real ocean in the movie than the time we actually spent filming it. I mean, such is the way that they were reusing a lot of the material. The film would debut at the Cannes Film Festival on May the 22nd, 2013. And Robert Redford was pretty nervous about this as well, that he didn't particularly want to sit and watch himself on screen. And let's face it, if you're watching All Is Lost, you're just watching Robert Redford on screen. I mean, there aren't that many other places to go. And he sat and watched the film, and I mean, quite angsty and not quite sure what he was going to get, and was greeted by a massive standing ovation at the end. The acclaim for the film was pretty much unanimous, actually. That the reviews coming out of Cannes were really, really, really strong. And in particular, it was Robert Redford at the heart of all of that. It was he who was being highlighted as one of his career best performances, not least that he put himself through all this at this stage in his career and delivered a film where he is the only actor you see, and yet it is absolutely gripping. The running time of the film as well, it's 105 minutes, and it takes a hell of an actor to be able to be on screen alone pretty much for that time and make us invested and interested. This whole acclaim for it really took Robert Redford by surprise. He would tell the New York Times, it threw me completely. He described how I felt self-conscious and awkward and shy, and I didn't know what to do. And he was talking to his wife about it and was just like saying, let's go. And he also said, though, to JC Chandor, enjoy this moment because it will probably never come again. And it was unusual for him. And the thing with Robert Redford as well, you assume across his career that he got like acting Oscars and things like that no shortage of awards for his leading man role and for his acting role. And yet, if you go down the list of the accolades that he's received for his acting, he's not won an Oscar. He's won an Oscar. Oscars have been in and around his films. If you go to Ordinary People, for instance, in 1980, he gets Best Director for directing that. He'd been nominated for Best Actor once in his career in 1973 for The Sting. He'd been nominated for Best Director twice, Quiz Show as well in 94, as well as Ordinary People. He'd won an honorary Oscar in 2001. There was thought 2013, surely he's in with a chance of getting an Oscar here. Surely this is like the film. No, I'll jump to the end there. No, not a single Academy Award nomination for All Is Lost. And when you consider how good the film is and how good the performance is, it's just absolutely staggering. I still think it's one. If we accept that awards are pretend and awards are nonsense, still, I mean, the overlooking of Redford for All Is Lost is just bizarre. It ends up in cinemas anyway. Let me take you to the US release of the film, October the 18th to the 20th, 2013. All Is Lost gets its, I mean, this is as it tries to build some kind of Oscar run, gets its release in the US on just 6 screens. It gets a $15,000 screen average. The idea is, let's see if we can expand the release of it over time. The film with the biggest screen average that weekend, that opened that weekend, on 19 screens, was 12 Years a Slave with $48,000 per screen. I mean, it blitzed everything. 12 Years a Slave would go on to win the Best Picture Academy Award the following year. All Is Lost, I mean, I've discussed, it just wouldn't. And in fact, if I pull up the chart as it expands onto 82 screens the following week, screen average is stuck at around $6,000, doesn't really go much further. The top of the chart that second week was Jackass Presents Bad Grandpa with a higher screen average. Imagine that. You don't have to. It actually happened. And All Is Lost, I mean, it never really broke through. By the time it had finished its US release, the highest it had got in the US box office chart was, I think it got in the end over one weekend up to 12th place. With 1.1 million in the bank on one weekend. That was it. Other than that, I mean, I wouldn't say it sank because that would just be a terrible gag and I wouldn't do that. But 6.2 million at the US box office. Outside of the US, it would do 7.3 million. Total worldwide gross, 13.6 million. The point this has been recorded is in the week after the death of Robert Redford. And I mean, I've written a fair amount in this past week. I've recorded stuff a fair amount in this past week. And I mean, you could throw a dart at Redford's IMDb page. You're going to find something worth watching. The one that loads of people missed in 2013 and the one that keeps being omitted when people are writing these wonderful tributes to Robert Redford, I would suggest is All Is Lost. For J.C. Shandor, he would go on to do A Most Violent Year. What a run of 3 films that is. Margin Call, All Is Lost, A Most Violent Year. I think All Is Lost is his best film, personally. I think it's one of Robert Redford's best films as well, and absolutely one of his best performances. Rest in peace, Robert.